All right. Y'all ready to start? All right. So I'm going to open in prayer, and then we'll jump into... So what we did last week was we looked at 4 philosophical ideas that weren't connected at all and just, interesting in how they connect to Christianity, but they're not built on top of each other. And we're going to do the same thing today. We're going to look at 4 different ones that are not, they're not necessarily built on top of each other, but they're 4 ideas that do overlap into Christianity. And these, the ones we're looking at today are some of my favorite ideas, ever. They're super cool. So I'm going to open in prayer, and then we'll go from there. So Lord, we come before you, and we ask that as we study these complex ideas, that you would reveal who you are in new ways to us, Lord. We thank you for that in your name. Amen. By the way, happy Pentecost to you all. Looking very red out there. Very exciting. I have red socks on, so I did the red. All right, so we ended last week with, would you push the fat man on the tracks to save, 5 other people? Would you be willing to end the life of another human being to save 5? And so that's where we ended last week. We're going to move into 4 different ideas. And the first idea that we're going to be looking at is David Hume against miracles, which I think is a really cool argument. So he's making an argument against miracles. So he's saying that miracles do not happen, and I'm going to show you why that's the case. So you can obviously see the overlap of Christianity on just the title itself. So David Hume is an 18th century Scottish philosopher and historian. And there's a picture of what a handsome young man he is. He believed that all human knowledge derives solely from experience. That's a really important concept. This is going to be underneath his argument against miracles. But one of the big things for him is he believed all human knowledge derives solely from experience. Whether it's your experience or somebody else's experience, it's coming from experience. So he's highly controversial during his time predominantly because of his religious beliefs. And he's a great influencer on Immanuel Kant, who we will be looking at shortly. So David Hume, not particularly a friend of the church or Christianity or any of that. And he is arguing against miracles. So that's what you need to know about David Hume. So what is a miracle? Any ideas?
Something that contradicts the physical laws that we know.
Okay. All right. Yep. That's pretty good. David Hume is going to say a miracle is anything that would suspend or change the laws of nature. That's what a miracle is. That image would classify as a miracle. Okay. So he's going to, according to Hume, it would never be rational to believe reports of miracles. Do you remember when we talked about Søren Kierkegaard last week and his leap of faith? And what is the main component of his leap of faith?
From the dead.
What's the underlying thought of making a leap of faith? He says, you're going to have to make a leap of faith, and a leap of faith has this underneath it. It's not rational. It is irrational. So you are making a decision, in his words, in the moment of madness. You are making a decision to do something that is completely irrational. That's what a leap of faith is. So David Hume, going along that same idea, is he's saying it would never be rational to believe reports of miracles. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Completely true statement. And Soren Kierkegaard is saying, yep, it's not rational, but we do it anyways. Because we're making a leap of faith. And making a leap of faith is irrational. Just by its nature, it has to be irrational. So, of course, David Hume is saying it wouldn't be rational, but he's going to give you a reason why it's not rational. His argument is very simple, and it's focused on balancing probabilities. And his probabilities are entertaining to me. So the first, the probability is he's going to start and he's going to ask the question, has there ever been a genuine confirmed instance of a true miracle? And his response is no. So you can argue with his response or not, but the general thought is that most miracles are not confirmed as in, we have evidence that this has taken place. But it does appear as though a miracle happened most of the time is the best that you can say. So he's saying there's never been a genuine confirmed instance of a true miracle. But then he's going to say, have people often lied or been mistaken when they claim they've seen a miracle? Yes. So then Hume is going to conclude, so what is more likely in this case? Yet another con or error, or that this time a true miracle occurred? What's that?
Con or error is more likely.
That's the more likely. And so his conclusion is you should never believe when somebody comes to you and says they've seen a miracle, because it is far more likely that they are either conning you or mistaken. And this is based on probabilities, because it is more likely that somebody would be mistaken or conning you than an actual miracle taking place. So do not believe the miracles. That would be David Hume's position. I just think it's a fascinating idea, just an interesting concept. And I do think that he's right. It's not rational. But you and I are called to the irrational. And the more that you try to make Christianity rational, the more problems that you're going to run into. Because nothing that Jesus did and said is rational. It's not. So for David Hume to say it's not rational is like, oh, you got us. We excel in being irrational. We don't put the stock in the value on your rationality that you do. So it's not a huge hit for me. I think he's right 100%, and at the same time, I don't care. So, and I don't know where you fall on it, but to me, it's just an interesting idea.
So what would you say the Catholic Church does when they go through their process of beatifying somebody? Okay, and so supposedly documenting miracles.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a very flawed system, and there have been many cons built into that system, and I've shared with you many times when Thomas Cranmer or when Henry VIII started the Reformation, he did not change anything. He wanted everything to stay the same. And the only thing that he was willing to change was he was willing to tear down the monasteries in England. Now, when he did that, everybody was appalled. How could you tear down these holy places? This is awful. Well, Henry VIII tore them down for financial gain. Because if he can tear them down and resell the land, all the better. But Thomas Cranmer, the man behind the idea, wanted him to tear them down for spiritual reasons. And the spiritual reason that Thomas Cranmer had was the monasteries in England were gross. They were places of sexual debauchery. They were places of alcoholism, and they were places that conned the people. And one of the main ways that they conned the people, they found in England when they tore them down, they had these crucifixes on the cross, and under the cross was a basket you could put money in. And if Britt was so kind and decided he wanted to put money in there for Aunt Martha to save her soul from purgatory, he would put some money in there, and when he did, the crucifix would jiggle. And what they said was, they're showing you that God is pleased with your giving. Well, when they tore down the monasteries, what they found was a pulley system back there, and the monks are sitting back there making the crosses jiggle. They found all kinds of nasty things back there. So, how did I get to that?
I asked you a question about the Catholic process.
Oh, yeah. The Catholic process is completely messed up. I mean, for anybody to be sainted, you have to have so many confirmed miracles, or at least one confirmed miracle, three confirmed miracles. So if you've got individuals that are particularly vested in somebody becoming a saint, I'm sure that you can manufacture 3 miracles somehow. I'm sure you could find 3 miracles in my life if you really, really wanted to. But they're probably not true, genuine miracles. I'm not a big fan of that whole process, okay?
On another direction, there's so many medical miracles that have been confirmed that this person could not get better, that there was no way that tumor could disappear. Things like that seem like miracles, and they have been confirmed medically, so.
Well, it's not necessarily confirmed as a miracle.
There's no way that it could happen.
It's confirmed of, generally what takes place is the medical community says, we have no idea how he is walking. And so the religious will say, miracle. And the non-religious will say, sometimes the body just does weird things. And so the problem is that you can't actually confirm that it was a miracle. You can suspect. And things can lead towards you thinking, there's a really good chance that that's a miracle. But can you 100% prove it? And that's what David Hume is saying. There's no miracle that's been 100% proven. Now, there are people who suspect it. But are those people suspecting it, wanting it to be a miracle? Because, as you know, we have a way of making things what we want them to be. And that's how our thinking generally rolls. So, that's David Hume. All right. Anselm's ontological argument. This is one of my favorite things. Anybody familiar with Anselm and anybody familiar with the ontological argument? No? All right. You should be familiar with Anselm because he was a former Archbishop of Canterbury. He is going way back, shortly after Augustine. So you should be familiar with Anselm, but his ontological argument is absolutely fascinating. I think you'll like this. Anselm of Canterbury, he's an 11th century theologian, monk, and former Archbishop of Canterbury, like I already told you. Apart from being Archbishop of Canterbury, though, he is the originator of 2 long-lasting ideas. It's hard to get one idea that is going to withstand the test of time, and he has 2 of them. And one is his ontological argument for the existence of God, and the other is his satisfaction theory of atonement. And if he did any of these, be Archbishop of Canterbury, or have the ontological argument, or the satisfaction theory, he would be a rock star. He has all 3 of them. So as far as monks go, he is rocking the monasteries. He is like as high as they come. He's super cool. Anselm of Canterbury, he's going to come up with the ontological argument. And so Anselm believed that by using reason alone, it is possible to show that God exists. So there was another individual who wanted to show that God exists just by looking out at nature, right? You remember that? Natural theology. You can look out at nature and you can tell that a God created it. You don't need a Bible, you don't need a church, you don't need Jesus, you don't need any of that to tell you that there's a higher power that created all this. And that's Paley's watch, Paley's watchmaker. And so Paley is arguing from natural theology for the existence of God. Doesn't mean that he takes Jesus out or the church or the Bible. He still upholds those. He's just saying that you can look out at the world without those things and you can acknowledge that there has to be a creator. Well, Anselm is going to go the other route, and he's going to say, you don't just have to look out at the world around. You can just use your reasoning, and you can come to a conclusion that God exists. Now, the ontological argument is fascinating, and you may hear this, and it may drive you nuts, his reason and logic. But it has withstood the test of time, and people in philosophy are still wrestling with this. So his theory is quickly attacked by another philosopher during his time. It's later attacked by Immanuel Kant in more detail, who we will get to next. Certainly the argument has its issues, but it is still an issue, is still being discussed today. So here's the ontological argument. I'm going to walk you through it. I think there's 5 or 6 steps in it. So his argument begins as God is defined as that than which nothing greater can be imagined. That's how he defines God. That which nothing greater can be imagined. That's God. Okay? So if that's God, then he goes on to say God can exist as an idea in the human mind, because you can imagine something that is greater than everything else. Therefore, you can imagine God. God can exist in your mind. You follow me so far? All right. It's like math. It builds on top of the concepts. All right. The third thing. A being that exists as an idea in the mind and in reality is greater than a being that exists only as an idea in the mind. You following me? So he's saying that you can conceive in your mind of a being that is God. You can conceive it in your mind. And that being has to be the greatest thing the mind can possibly imagine. But then he's going to go on and he's going to say a being that exists in the mind and in reality would be greater than something that just exists in the mind. Right? And everybody says yes. So then he's going to go on, he's going to say, thus, if God exists only as an idea in the mind, then we can imagine something that is greater than God. That being a God that actually exists. Then he goes on, but we cannot imagine something greater than that God. Therefore, God must exist, both in the mind and in reality. Proof that God exists. 100% proof that God exists. Now, there are tons of these. There are tons of ontological arguments for God's existence. Augustine has 5 different ones. Anselm has his. There's a whole bunch of them floating around out there. But this is the one that has gotten the most traction ever. This is the one that is discussed the most. And his basic assumption is if God is that thing which is the greatest thing that you can imagine, and if there's something that exists in the mind and in reality, that thing would be better than something that exists just in the mind. Therefore, God has to be something that exists in the mind as well as in reality, therefore God must exist. It's a crazy argument. It really is. Yeah.
Like a pub challenge.
And you know, there's not many people that are like, you got me. Most people see some problems in this, but it's still a cool idea. Jim?
But you must accept the if statement, and he doesn't make any proof for the if statement. It's just like, okay, there's that leap of faith. Well, if this is this, then that's that. Well, okay, yeah, but if is a big if.
Yeah, and he's been attacked on, well, you could do this with anything.
Yeah.
Like you could come in and you could say, this is the greatest table in the world. And you know, you could make the argument that everything has to exist because you can imagine it.
If 3 is equal to 2, then 2 times 3 can be either 4 or 6. Big if.
It's been attacked a lot, and I don't know anybody that puts a lot of stock in it, but philosophy students, theology students, study this today. And I've written several papers on Anselm's ontological argument. It's just, it's fascinating. People love it. People hate it. But I thought I'd... What's that?
Was that your sabbatical paper?
No, my sabbatical paper is on baptism and it's basically against the concept of open table. So open table is the idea that, you know, anybody can receive communion. And so I am arguing that that's horrible, and you should not open the table, you should open the baptismal font. No.
Will you share that with us?
Yes, it's in the final stages, and I'm going to try and get it published. So I'm going to send it up to Justin, who's going to help me make it what it needs to get published, and then I'm going to try and get it published. But once I'm completely finished with it, yeah, I'll definitely share it with you, because I firmly believe that, you know, opening up the communion table to the unbaptized is the wrong thing to do. You just open up the font and you start baptizing people. Then you don't have 1 million people sitting in your church who are unbaptized. But the church is making it, sitting in your church who can't receive communion because they've never been baptized. But the more the church makes baptism difficult, the more you have unbaptized people sitting in your churches. Just baptize them. Then they can come up and receive the Lord's Supper. It doesn't make sense to open up the table because this is for the body of Christ. And if you're not part of the body of Christ, then what are we doing? And Jesus did the Last Supper with his disciples. It's not the feeding of the 5,000. He fed 5,000 just indiscriminately. But when he had the Last Supper, he didn't invite the crowds. He invited his 12 disciples. He invited his followers. And that's the same thing that you and I should do. But should we make more followers quickly as possible? Yeah. So open up the baptismal font. That's what the paper's on, not the ontological argument. All right, moving on from there, you got Kant's categorical imperative. Come on, you got to be familiar with categorical imperative. If you're not familiar with it by name, you are certainly familiar with it by action or philosophy. So Immanuel Kant is an 18th century German philosopher, one of the central figures of the Enlightenment, considered to be the father of modern philosophy. Religiously, Kant is a complex individual. So some see him as an enemy of Christianity, and others see his work as an aid to Christianity. And Immanuel Kant actually was hoping to aid some form of Christianity. Now, he's not necessarily a Christian like you and I are. He's more like a deist. But he was trying to aid Christianity. But what he ended up doing was taking a dagger and sticking it in the heart of Christianity. He has proposed philosophical ideas that the church still cannot answer. And so he is probably, if you're going to wrestle with a philosopher, he is the biggest philosopher out there. He is massive figure. So we're going to be looking at his categorical imperative, which is one of the things that he is most known for. So Kant believed that consistency is the heart of morality. It is when we become inconsistent that we fall into the danger of being immoral. So consistency is his primary aim. If I think that I deserve a certain type of treatment, then others in my situation deserve that same treatment. So that's the basic premise of his categorical imperative. We're going to unpack that a little bit more. So this is what he's going to say. Act only according to the maxim by which you can at the same time wish that it should become a universal law. So essentially he's saying, whatever I do, whatever decisions I make, I have to make them with the assumption that I would be fine with this being a universal law across the world. Whatever is good for me has to be good for other people to do. So therefore, I can't do things that I wouldn't want somebody else to do to me. I have to do things that I would want to be made universal law. Everybody can do it without society breaking down. And that's a core tenet to it. Because, you could be comfortable with certain things for yourself, have that being universal law for everybody, and then that have the effect of society completely breaking down. So that's his main thrust. If your role or maxim could consistently be followed by everyone, then you are in no danger of doing wrong. That is the categorical imperative. Whatever I do has to be good for everybody to do. Problems with this? What's that? Oh, we're going to get into that on the next one. Anybody see any problems with this?
Nazis.
There's certain problems, but there's a lot of that's very close to the golden rule, do unto others that you would have them do unto you.
Yeah.
It's opposite.
It's opposite.
It's opposite. Because it's singular.
Okay.
What would be the foundational problem to the categorical imperative?
People are different.
People are
Yeah,
different.
and
I'll give you.
People sin.
What's that?
People sin.
and we live in a fallen, broken world. So I'll give you an example of people are different, then I'll give you an example of sin. So people are different. Let's say that I gave Jack a gift. I'm going to give Jack a gift. It's a pretty cool gift. He really likes it. He thinks it's amazing. Okay? I gave Jack a gift. But because I am who I am, I do not expect a thank you. Because I don't expect thank yous. I give gifts and I don't expect thank yous in return. That's just who I am. I don't expect a thank you. I don't remember that there's a thank you coming. That's just a part of who I am. But I live in a world where most people expect a thank you, don't they? Just because I don't care about thank yous does not mean that the rest of the world does not care about thank yous. This is completely dependent upon my own personality and whims. Whatever I like must be good for everybody. And the problem is that we're all different and we like things done differently. And just because I want something done a certain way or I expect something done a certain way for me doesn't mean I can impose that on the rest of the world. You may like things completely different. So the idea of do unto others as you would have them do to you, the better way to look at that is do unto others as they would like for you to do to them. Like, because that's what really matters. We're all different. And you can't base how society is going to function on what you like. It's completely individualistic.
But by you not expecting a thank you, that doesn't prohibit other people from doing it. You're just saying, well, I'd be fine if universal law was that way, and I'm acting that way.
But I should write a thank you because I know that I am different than most people. I can't just change the laws of the world because I like it that way. It's completely individualistic.
Thank you is different than expecting a thank you. You changed the example a little bit.
Expecting.
You know, he's going to write you a thank you note, but you're not going to act as if I wish he hadn't done that. You know, you're fine
on
with
your
every-
thank you. I hate thank you notes. This is the worst thing.
But you're fine with other people writing it.
Okay, so, all right, it's a flawed example, but the idea still stands. It's individualistic. It is based on you. And you are not the controller of the entirety of the world. You have to have a standard that is based on something higher than you. You can't be the dictator of all things. There has to be a higher standard. The categorical imperative just places you as the one. The other thing that was brought up is we live in a sinful, broken world, and some people would be fine with certain sinful things taking place, and therefore they can justify their actions because, well, I would be fine if everybody did this. Like, there has to be something beyond just you, or you slide into all sorts of problems. Tom?
Isn't that a true statement for a charismatic leader? Like Adolf Hitler, he believed in what he wanted the world to be.
Yeah.
And he had several million people that jumped in and did the same thing. So there's one of the big problems of this everybody thinking like I do. If you're a good person, that's great. A Pope or Jesus. But a bad example is a dictator.
There are no good people.
No,
None
charismatic people.
None of us can bear the weight of dictating what is right and what is wrong to the entirety of the world.
But all of that said, it doesn't say must be followed by everyone, it says could be followed by everyone.
Yeah, but
It's
you're.
saying you have a choice, I'm gonna do this, and I don't mind if anybody else does it.
It's
but
not
they
the.
have to.
It's not the idea that the rest of the world has to. It's the idea that you can justify any action you want based on, well, I'd be fine if everybody did this. Therefore, it must be right.
Oh, all right, well, that way it makes more sense, which is still stupid.
So, okay, so you all want to go to Hitler, so I'm going to bring you to Hitler, okay? And in doing so, we are going to look at Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch or Overman or Superman or whatever you want to call it. That is the idea that we're going to end on today. I love this concept. I think it's super cool, and it's very much misunderstood. So let me bring you into Friedrich Nietzsche and share some of his life and some of what led him to this, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on him. So, first of all, he's a 19th century German philosopher and one of the most known and celebrated philosophers in history, which is quite an achievement. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. It's quite an achievement because he lived a very short life, and he was very unhealthy, like the entirety of his life. He became the youngest chair at his university in philosophy, and he only held that position for 10 years before he had to retire because of his health. He got that position around the age of 24, so he had to retire in his mid-30s because of health issues. His death is like tragic. Apparently, and nobody really knows, so it's a lot of legend tied up in here. And the reason that you don't know is because he went nuts. But apparently he was watching a racehorse, and the horse got flogged, and he lost his mind, and he tried to save the horse, and in doing so, he fell and he hit his head, and he went nuts. And he started like writing letters to all kinds of people like that were seriously concerned about him. His mother took care of him much of his later life. His sister took care of him, and he was placed in an asylum and died. Had a couple strokes and died. Died around age of 56. Just like tragic life. And even in all that, he still was able to accomplish what he accomplished. It's pretty impressive. So died at around 56. So the foundation of the Übermensch or the Overman or the Superman is the idea God is dead. And if you're familiar with that is a phrase from Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, God is dead when we have killed him. Now, a lot of people hear that phrase, so if they're outside of the church and they're enemies of the church, they're like, yes, Friedrich Nietzsche is my favorite philosopher, I love him. And if they're inside the church, they're like, this is horrible, Friedrich Nietzsche is terrible, do away with him. And that's why you've got quotes like this, like, God is dead, Friedrich Nietzsche, 1883, Nietzsche is dead, God, 1900, because that's when he died. And this is the church like poking fun at Friedrich Nietzsche, which you don't have to do, because if you understand what he's saying in its context, it's a really cool idea. And so what he's saying is he's not celebrating that God is dead. He's saying, look, we've come out of the Enlightenment. And what has come out of the Enlightenment is a culture in which we have killed God. God is no longer present in our culture. God is dead and we have killed him. And in killing God, we also killed God's value system. And so what Friedrich Nietzsche is concerned about is that without the value system that was attached to God, society is in real trouble. Because now we have no value system. God is dead, we killed him, and killed his value system. Now we live in a culture that has no value system. And what the end result of that is going to be is nihilism. Nothing means anything. It's all meaningless. It doesn't matter. And a lot of people will peg Friedrich Nietzsche as a nihilist. He's not. This is his starting point. He's starting with nihilism, and he's saying, this is where we are currently. And the reason that he's writing this and giving you all this is to prevent us from sliding into nihilism. He's not trying to push us there. He's trying to prevent us from ending up there. And the reason that we would end up there is because we live in a culture in which there is no value system, because we killed God and his value system and we replaced it with nothing. There's nothing there. And so Friedrich Nietzsche is writing into this void. He's looking out at the culture and he's saying, we're in really big trouble. And he is not a fan of God. He's not a fan of Christianity. He's not a fan of any of that. But he's smart enough to realize that when you completely turn society up on its head and you don't put anything in its place, you don't have any other systems in place, you're in trouble. And so again, he's not a fan of the church by any stretch, but he also is not necessarily the enemy. and we have pegged him as the enemy far too much. So, thoughts on that before we get into it?
The Enlightenment is what period of time?
It's like it's the 18th century. So the guy we just looked at. It's Immanuel Kant coming through there. So what you're looking at is the philosophers after the Enlightenment, and what they're trying to do is deal with the ramifications of the Enlightenment. Okay, so now we're enlightened human beings. We don't need God. Okay, so now we're removing God from society and everything. And Friedrich Nietzsche's like, that's fine. I don't have any problem with you removing God from society, but you better have something in its place. And currently, you're just removing God and nothing in its place. And that is going to cause us to slide into nihilism. And so that's what he's done. That's what he's writing against. So now they live in a culture without a value system. We already went over all that. So by extension, many believe he's a nihilist. We already went over all that. His aim is to rescue us from it. So he starts with some very basic questions. And these are questions that you probably asked yourself or somebody else has asked you. And the questions are, what would the best version of you be? And what do you need in order to become that version? So he's just looking out at society, and he's looking at individuals in society, and he's asking the question, okay, there's no God, there's no God value system anymore. So what is the best version of you? What does that look like? And how do you get there? And those are the very beginning questions that he's wrestling with. Humanity must continue to evolve to the next stage of evolution. And so this is a real central idea of him. Is he's saying, look, throughout history, we've evolved. We've evolved from apes. This is not necessarily theory that I ascribe to, but this is theory that Friedrich Nietzsche has. We've evolved from apes and the missing link and all the way through, and here we are. Why do we think that this is the end stage of evolution? Why do we think, well, we've arrived now? We need to continue to evolve as a society. We can't just stop and be comfortable. The evolution needs to continue because we are not as good as we could be. So he's going to give you some characteristics of what the next evolved species would look like. So they would be psychologically strong and master this life. And this is central to him. This life is what matters. And your job as a human being is to master this life. You have to master this life. This, what you see before you is what matters. Now that's different from what was there when there was a God value system there. When God's value system was there, what mattered?
Salvation.
Afterlife. We're here for 80, 90 years if we're lucky, and that's it. We're in eternity in heaven, salvation, all of that. So what matters? That matters. Friedrich Nietzsche is going to shift it, and he's going to say, no. The world that we live in is what matters. This is all that matters right here. And this goes along with his second idea. There's no concern for otherworldliness. There's no looking out at another world, the next world. No, this world. This is the only thing that matters, this world. And you got to master it. And then he goes on to say, you have to establish your own value system. Each person, your own value system, not based on preconceived political ideas, not based on religion, not based on your current culture, based on you. What is your value system? What do you value? And you have to base everything on that. And then you create your own morality, what matters for you. You create your own morality. And our meaning is derived by striving to become the Superman, which the Superman is all of these things. If you can do all of those things, free yourself from otherworldliness, Free yourself from politics, free yourself from religion, free yourself from the culture, and you can become the best person that you can possibly be. You will become the Uberman, or the Overman, or the Superman. And so I'm sure you can see where Nazism quickly comes into play here.
3 and 4, isn't that nihilism?
I mean, not necessarily. It does have some overlap.
It's all me that matters, that's nihilism, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a broader category. So you wouldn't want to just pin it down to nihilism. It does, a lot of these philosophical ideas are going to have overlap in them. But a true nihilist, he's not. Meaning, he's trying to derive some meaning, and the meaning comes from you striving to be this individual. So if you can achieve all that, then you'll actually become that individual. Now, what takes place is that he dies. I shared with you that he dies, and he doesn't finish his writings. And his sister, who is schooled in his thought, she finishes his papers, and she gets them published. But she is much more sympathetic to the German position than Frederick ever was. And so she writes these, publishes them under his name, puts them out there. Nazi Germany uses them as propaganda for their thing, their goals, and then scholars later come along and correct her writing to really match what he was saying. The Ubermensch, the Overman, the whatever you want to call it, the Superman, is an intolerable human being. If we actually did this, you wouldn't be able to stand to be in the same room with the individual. And if you actually became that, you would be pretty much the only person who likes you. Okay?
I have trouble with, establish your own value system. If it's not politics, it's not religion, it's not culture, what other choices are you going to?
Well, I mean, what they would say is that you're locked into these categories because they're the only categories that you know. And so, and what Friedrich Nietzsche is saying is that you've got to push beyond the categories that you know. The categories are imprisoning you. And you know the categories are imprisoning you. So, yeah, and you don't have to look past politics to know the categories imprison you. If you check your box as Republican, then that means you believe all this. If you check your box as Republicans or Democrats, and then you believe all this. Well, no human being actually believes all this and all this, but we lock ourselves in because we're in prison. What Friedrich Nietzsche is saying is, you've got to push beyond these categories. You've got to, society has broken you down and said you have to do this and created you into robots, basically. You go beyond, you evolve beyond where you are right now. You become better. More able to make more complex decisions than you ever were right now. But it's all that idea of evolving further is wrapped up in this. So, the argument would be that you are who you are because that's as much as you're evolved. But could Kay evolve further? I think somebody behind you thinks that you could evolve a little more.
What are my other value systems besides those things so that I can evolve? I don't know where else to go besides those three.
Well, that's why it's so.
But that was just
Yeah, you don't actually want to do this. So I'm not prescribing this. I'm just sharing it with you as information because I think that it's interesting. Please do not try to find your own Obermensch. And if you do, you're going to have to find a new church. Probably a new neighborhood, and probably a new state, and probably a new country. That's all I got for you today. This is the end of Christian Formation for the season. We will come back. I've already got 4 of the next ones planned. I'm super excited for them. So it should be a lot of fun. Let's go to church.